Atlanta hadn't woken up yet. The eastern sky was still gray. Traffic lights cycled for empty streets, and inside the glass tower on Peachtree Center Avenue, one man had already been there for hours. 8th floor, long corridor, the soft roll of a cartwheel on polished stone. He didn't hurry. He never hurried. 12 years in this building. He knew every blind corner, every flickering bulb, every sound the 11th floor door made on Monday mornings. He knew this place better than anyone who had ever worn a suit inside it. But today something was different. The 20th floor had been lit since last night. Conference room B was reserved, and the woman who ran this entire company had come looking for him, not to report a problem, to ask him to sit inside a room he had never been invited into. The cart stopped. He stood still in the empty hallway, a man nobody saw, about to see everything. Darnell Cooper did not own an alarm clock. He didn't need one. His body had learned the hour the way old buildings learn weather. Not through thought, but through something deeper. Something settled into the bones over years of repetition. Every morning at 4:45 his eyes opened. Not slowly, not with the fog of dreams. Just open. Done. Ready. He lay there for exactly 2 minutes. That was his rule. 2 minutes where he was allowed to feel whatever he felt before the day got hands on him. Some mornings it was nothing. Just ceiling. Just the low hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the distant bark of somebody's dog 3 buildings over. Some mornings it was her, Vivian, not the grief of her. He had moved past the sharpest edges of that, but just her presence. The ghost of her weight on the other side of the mattress. The way she used to make a small sound when she rolled over. Not quite a word, not quite silence. Something in between, 5 years, and his body still remembered which side of the bed was his. He got up. He moved. That was the other rule. You felt it for 2 minutes and then you moved, because Vivian herself had told him that. Not about grief specifically. About everything, Darnell. You are the kind of man who can sit inside a feeling so long you forget there's a door. She'd said it laughing, not cruel, just knowing him too well. He had laughed too. He hadn't understood what she meant until she was gone, and he'd sat inside the apartment for 11 days straight, and only left because the neighbor knocked to ask if he was dead. So, 2 minutes. Then he moved. The kitchens were small enough that 3 steps got him to the coffee maker. He measured the grounds without looking. 2.5 scoops, the same chipped ceramic mug, the same window over the sink where the parking lot below was still dark and wet from whatever had come through overnight. The coffee dripped. He stood. He looked at nothing. The apartment was in East Point, just outside Atlanta proper, a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. The carpet was clean because Darnell kept it clean. The walls were bare except for one photograph above the small table near the front door. Vivian at somebody's cookout, laughing at something off camera, holding a paper plate with both hands. He'd taken the picture himself. He didn't remember what had made her laugh. He wished he did. But the laugh itself was enough. The laugh was still there. He drank his coffee standing up, always standing. Sitting felt like settling in, and settling in at 5 in the morning felt like a trap he didn't want to walk into. He drank it black. Vivian had taken hers with so much cream and sugar that he used to say she wasn't drinking coffee. She was drinking dessert. She'd said coffee without sugar was a cry for help. He thought about that most mornings and almost smiled. At 5:15 he was in his car. A 2009 Camry with 142,000 miles and a passenger mirror held in place with electrical tape. The tape had been there for 3 years. He kept meaning to fix it. He never fixed it. Some things you lived with. The city at 5 in the morning was a different creature than the city at any other hour. Quieter, honest in a way it wasn't later. The lights changed for no one. The streets were empty enough that you could see the shape of them. The actual architecture of the roads without the blur of everyone else's urgency piled on top. Darnell liked this version of Atlanta. It felt like a city telling the truth. Caldwell Enterprises sat on Peachtree Center Avenue in a building that had been renovated sometime in the early 2000s and had the particular mix of old bones and new glass that came from money applied in layers over decades. 22 floors. The lobby had marble floors and a security desk and a wall of windows that let in the morning light at an angle that made everything look more significant than it was. Darnell had watched the sunrise come through those windows so many times that he knew exactly which tiles it touched first. The third from the left in the second row. Then it moved, then it covered everything. He badged in at the side entrance. The security guard on overnight, a young man named Derek who was working through his second year of community college, gave him the same nod he gave every morning. Not unfriendly, not really friendly either. Just the acknowledgement of two people who had become part of each other's routine without ever becoming part of each other's lives. Darnell nodded back. That was the whole of it. The service elevator took him to the 8th floor. He kept his cart in the utility closet at the far end of the hall, supplies organized the same way every week, nothing wasted, nothing missing. He had a system. He'd had the same system for 12 years. The system worked, so he kept it. He started at the far end and worked back toward the elevator. Windows first on this floor because the morning light came in early and showed every smear. Then the common areas. Then the restrooms. Then the individual offices when people started arriving. After 8, when the floor filled up and he could move through it without being in anyone's way. That was the art of it. That was the thing nobody understood about the job from the outside. It wasn't just cleaning. It was timing. It was the geometry of invisibility. You learned when to be somewhere and when not to be, how to move through a space full of people without registering as a presence, how to do your work in the gaps between other people's importance. Darnell was very good at it, which meant he saw things, not because he was easy, not because he paid attention to things that weren't his business, but because invisible people develop a particular kind of vision. When you're not being watched, you watch. When no one tracks what you're doing, you notice what everyone else is doing. It wasn't something he decided. It was just what happened over 12 years of being the person people didn't see. He knew which executives came in early because they loved the work, and which ones came in early because they were scared. He knew which of the third-floor account managers was in over her head because she spent 40 minutes every Monday morning going back through Friday's files before anyone else arrived, relearning what she'd already done. He knew that the VP of something on the 16th floor, a man with a very expensive watch and a very loud laugh, cried sometimes on Tuesday afternoons with his door closed. Not sobbing, just the quiet kind, the kind you do when you've decided nobody's watching. Darnell never told anyone any of it. It wasn't his to tell, he just knew. He kept it the way you keep things that have no practical use but feel important to hold on to anyway. By 6:30 he was on the 14th floor. He liked 14. The layout was different from the others. Open plan mostly, with a cluster of glass-walled conference rooms along the south wall. The morning light came in flat and wide here. You could see all the way down the row of workstations and out through the windows to the city still waking up, and there was something about that view. At that hour, the skyline going from grey to gold, that made Darnell feel like he was watching something that most people missed. He was mopping the section near the south windows when he first became aware, in the way that you sometimes become aware of things before you consciously register them, that he was not alone on the floor. He turned. Patricia Johnson was standing at the end of the hall, not walking, not heading somewhere, just standing. In the way that people stand when they are trying to decide something difficult and need to be on their feet to do it. She was in a charcoal blazer and dark slacks, her reading glasses pushed up into her silver-streaked hair, and she was looking at him with an expression that Darnell could not immediately place. Not the CEO expression, he knew that one. He had watched it from corners and doorways for 3 years. This was something else. His first thought was that he had done something wrong. His second thought was that he couldn't figure out what. He stopped the mop, stood up straight. Mrs. Johnson, just in his head. He didn't say it out loud because she hadn't spoken yet, and it felt presumptuous to fill the silence she was holding. She walked toward him, not fast. Measured, Darnell, his name, out of her mouth. He had worked in this building for 12 years and could count on 2 hands the number of times anyone above the facilities manager had used his first name. His last name lived on a badge. His first name lived in a file somewhere. Patricia Johnson knowing it, saying it, directing it at him in an empty hallway at 6:30 in the morning. That was not part of the pattern he'd built for himself. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to hear me out before you answer." He nodded. "Because what else did you do?" She stopped a few feet away, not close enough to be uncomfortable. Exactly the distance of a conversation between 2 people who don't know each other well but are about to say something real. There's a meeting tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, conference room B on this floor. She paused. I want you to be in that meeting. Darnell looked at her, then at the mop in his hand, then back at her. In the meeting? Yes. The business meeting? Yes. He waited for the rest of it, the part that would make this make sense. Like he needed to clean during the meeting, or set something up, or be available in case something needed handling. Any of those things would have fit into the world as he understood it. But she didn't add anything. She just watched him waiting. Mrs. Johnson, he said it carefully. I'm the building custodian. I clean the floors. I know what you do. I don't have any business background. I don't know anything about whatever's being discussed in that meeting. I wouldn't know what was. That's not why I'm asking you. And there it was, the thing that stopped him. Because she wasn't being polite. She wasn't managing him. She was saying something specific, something that had weight to it, and she was waiting for him to hear it. Then why? He asked. And he heard something in his own voice he hadn't planned. Not suspicion, just genuine need to understand. Patricia looked at him for a long moment. The kind of moment where you can tell a person is deciding how much to say. My husband, she said, kept a list. Darnell went still. Victor, before he got sick, he was the kind of man who was always preparing for things he hoped would never happen. He had contingency plans and backup documents and letters for people in case he wasn't around to say things in person. She said this without softness, but not without feeling. Just the flat fact of knowing someone completely and having to describe them to someone else. He kept a list of people he trusted, not business contacts, not investors, people. And I found it in the safe about a month after he died. Darnell held himself very still. Something in his chest had shifted. Your name was on it, Patricia said. First on it. The hallway was completely quiet. He could hear his own heartbeat, which was not something that happened to him often. He was not a man who startled easily or felt things in large, sudden waves. He felt them slowly, the way weather moved through, gradual and thorough and hard to stop once it started. He wrote a note next to each name, she continued. Next to yours, he wrote, this man sees what's actually there, not what he wants to be there. What is? Darnell said nothing. Because there was nothing to say that wouldn't be less than what the moment asked for. The meeting tomorrow is with a man named Scott Hill, she said. He wants to buy a strategic stake in Caldwell. He's been patient, very professional, very polished, and I don't trust him. She paused. I can't prove anything yet. But I've been in rooms with people like him or before, and there's something in how he moves through a negotiation. He's managing something, shaping something. And I can't see the whole shape from where I'm standing because he wants me focused on certain things and not others. She looked directly at him. I need someone in that room who he won't manage. Someone he won't even think to manage. Someone he'll look past. Darnell understood. And something about understanding made it worse, somehow. Not worse bad, worse heavy. Mrs. Johnson, if I see something I might not know what I'm looking at even if I see it. Victor didn't think so. Which was the whole argument, apparently. And it landed the way she probably knew it would. He looked down at the mop, at his hands on the handle. At the floor he'd been cleaning when the world had decided to do something unexpected. He gave her 5 reasons, not excuses, real reasons. He didn't own a suit, he didn't understand the terminology they'd use. If he said something wrong, he'd disrupt her negotiation and make things worse. He had no credibility in that room. He didn't know how to act. She listened to all 5. She didn't interrupt, she didn't wave them off. Don't own a suit, she repeated. Okay, wear whatever you'd wear to something you took seriously. I'm not asking you to speak unless you see something. I'm not asking you to perform. I'm asking you to be present and honest. You've been doing that in this building for 12 years, without anyone asking. She turned and walked back toward the elevator, then she stopped. Victor said he could tell your character from one conversation, she said, without turning around. He was a hard man to impress. I'd like to find out if he was right, and she was gone. Darnell stood in the hallway for a long time after that. Long enough that the light through the windows shifted from gold wood to the flat white of full morning. Long enough that he heard the elevator open and close twice on floors below him. Long enough that the mop water got cold. He didn't finish the 14th floor. He came back for it at 8, when his hands had steadied and his thinking had slowed down to something manageable. He thought about Victor Bryant. Victor had come to Caldwell Enterprises 14 years ago as co-founder and co-CEO, and Darnell had started 2 years later. So they'd overlapped for 12 years, which was long enough that Darnell had stopped thinking of him as a name or a title, and had just thought of him as a presence, a particular quality of attention that moved through the building differently than anyone else. Most burnt metal in that building moved through it like they were heading somewhere, urgently, purposefully, always in transit between one important thing and the next. Victor moved through it like he was actually somewhere, like wherever he was standing was, for that moment, exactly where he intended to be. He'd stopped at Darnell's cart one morning, in the fall of Darnell's second year. Early, before the building filled up, Darnell had been changing out cleaning solution and Victor had walked past, then stopped and turned back. Does that stuff actually work on the marble in the lobby, or does it just look like it works? Darnell had blinked, then answered honestly. It worked on surface grime, but the marble had some etching from years of foot traffic, and the cleaning solution wasn't going to touch that. That needed professional restoration. He'd put it in his notes 3 times. Nothing had happened. Victor had pulled out his phone and typed something. Name? Cooper, Darnell Cooper. I'll get someone out here. And 2 weeks later, someone had come. Darnell had never told his supervisor what had happened. He'd just watched the restoration team work and thought about how strange it was that a sentence said to the right person at the right time could move something that had been stuck for years. After that, Victor stopped sometimes. Not always, not on a schedule. But when their paths crossed in those early hours, he'd stop. Ask something real. Not the performative "how are you" of people who didn't want to know. The actual question with the actual pause after it. How's the building treating you? You got what you need for the West Corridor project. Your wife doing better. He'd said that once when Vivian had been sick the first time, the early scare that turned out to be nothing, and Darnell still didn't know how Victor had known. He'd never called him Mr. Cooper after that first time. Just Darnell. Like it was obvious. And Darnell had thought, in the way you think things you don't examine too closely because examining them might make them smaller, that this was just who Victor was. Curious. Decent. The kind of man who made the people around him feel like people. He hadn't known Victor was writing anything down. He drove home that evening on the same route he always took. He sat at his kitchen table and ate the leftover chicken he'd made Sunday and looked at the wall and thought. What he thought was, I am 58 years old. I have mopped floors for 31 years, 12 of them in this building. I have never been asked to do anything like this. And then he thought, Victor wrote my name down. And that second thought was bigger than the first, which surprised him. He didn't sleep well. He woke twice. The second time he didn't go back to sleep at all, but lay there watching the ceiling get gradually lighter as morning came and thought about what Patricia had said. About Scott Hill managing a room. About the shape of something she couldn't see completely. Darnell had spent 12 years seeing things from angles other people didn't use. He didn't know if that amounted to anything. But he knew what it felt like to notice what someone was trying to hide. He knew the particular quality of attention people gave to things they were pretending not to care about. He'd seen it in other contexts. In the building. In the way certain executives held themselves when they were in the same room as someone they were trying to influence. He wasn't sure he could help, but Victor had thought it so. And Victor, in Darnell's experience, had been right about the things he paid attention to. At 4:50 he got up. He made coffee. He stood at the window and watched the parking lot the way he always did and let the morning do what it did. Then he went to the closet and found the navy button-down he'd bought for his nephew's college graduation 4 years ago. It still fit. Barely he pressed it the night before, but the collar had picked up a slight crease anyway. He looked at it in the bathroom mirror and thought, this is the best I have. This is what I am bringing to this. There was something settling about that. He sent Patricia a text at 5:23 in the morning. The number she's asked and slipped under the door of the utility closet, sometime after their conversation. He'd found it when he went back for the mop bucket. The text said, I'll be there. 10 o'clock, she'd replied 4 minutes later. Just, thank you. He looked at those 2 words for a moment and then put the phone in his pocket and went back to the window. The parking lot was starting to get light. A pigeon was doing something on top of the dumpster shed. The world was being completely ordinary. Darnell drank his coffee and let it. He got to the building at his usual time, did his usual floors, didn't go near the 14th, didn't let himself think too much about what was coming. He did his work the way he always did it, with care, with the particular attention to detail that it had never really been about the job so much as about who he was, the need to do things properly, to leave things better than he found them. Vivian used to say that about him. She said it like it was the whole of him in a sentence. You leave things better than you found them, Darnell. She'd meant it as a compliment. He'd never been sure he deserved it entirely, but he carried it anyway. At 9:45, he went to the men's room on the 14th floor and checked his reflection. The shirt looked okay. His face looked like his face, worn in, serious, not unkind. He was not a man who had ever been particularly handsome or particularly plain. He was a man who looked like someone who had done physical work for a long time and thought carefully about things and didn't bother people unless he had something worth saying. He looked, he thought, like himself, which was either exactly right or completely wrong for what was about to happen. He took 3 slow breaths, not because he read self-help books, just because Vivian used to do that before hard things, and he'd picked it up without meaning to. Then he walked to conference room B. The room had been set up while he was on other floors. He knew this because he'd cleaned it yesterday afternoon and left it empty, and now the long oval table had water glasses and notepads and the particular arrangement of chairs that meant something official and important was about to happen in the space. The city through the windows was bright and busy and completely indifferent to whatever was about to unfold inside. Patricia was already there, seated at the far end of the table, reviewing something on an open folder. She had a stillness about her that Darnell recognized from watching her over 3 years. The stillness of a person who has learned to keep their interior weather from showing on their face. She looked up when he came in, nodded once. Brief, certain-like. You came. Good, now we do this. She gestured to the chair along the side wall, slightly back from the table, not at it, but near it. The position of someone who was present but not participating. Observer position, Darnell understood. He moved to it, sat down, settled his hands in his lap, made himself still. 2 of Patricia's team members were already seated at the table. A woman he recognized from the legal department, early 40s, sharp-looking, with a yellow legal pad already covered in notes. And a man he didn't know, younger, mid-30s, who had the eager, careful posture of someone trying to prove himself in a room that mattered. At 10 minutes past 10, Scott Hill arrived. And that was the moment Darnell understood, viscerally and without analysis, what Patricia had meant. Scott Hill walked into a room the way some men walked into rooms that they had already decided belonged to them. Not aggressively. That was the thing. Aggression would have been readable, resistible. This was different. This was smoother. He came in like he was doing the room a favor by arriving, like his presence was the thing that would make the meeting what it needed to be. He shook Patricia's hand with both of his, the grip that was warm and the extra hand on top that said, I value this, I value you, and Darnell watched Patricia receive it without any change of expression. He watched Hill scan the room in the 3 seconds after the handshake. The way his eyes moved, legal woman noting her notepad and its fullness, young man dismissing him, back to Patricia, and then past Darnell, through Darnell, the way you went past furniture, not rudeness, just category assignment, irrelevant, not a factor. Hill's assistant came in behind him, Monica Reed, 40-ish, precise, with a leather portfolio she set down without a sound, already open to a tabbed section. She sat to Hill's right, pulled a pen, ready. Darnell noticed her hands still, the kind of still that was practiced, not natural. Hill settled into the chair across from Patricia, set his briefcase on the table to his left. A flat, dark leather case, expensive, the kind that looked like it never got scuffed because it was handled carefully by someone who understood the value of appearances. The meeting began, and Darnell sat in his chair along the wall and did the only thing he was there to do. He watched. Hill's voice was good, calibrated. He'd been trained somewhere, not in school, or not only in school but in the specific school of persuasion that certain kinds of men attended, through experience, through watching what worked and refining it and removing everything that didn't. He talked about market positioning and strategic partnership and the value creation potential that an equity stake would unlock for Caldwell, in ways the current capital structure couldn't support. The words made a shape that sounded like an argument for mutual benefit. Darnell didn't understand most of the specific content, but he understood the structure. He understood that Hills was not making an argument so much as he was building a frame. He was trying to put Patricia inside a frame. Patricia asked questions. Good ones, Darnell could tell, because Hill would pause just slightly before answering them. Not hesitation, more recalibration, like a man adjusting his grip, and his answers were detailed and confident and always ended with a pivot back toward the thing he wanted Patricia thinking about. Darnell's eyes moved the way they always moved in a space he was reading. Methodical, not obvious. The way you learn to observe when you spent years in the same rooms as people who never looked back at you. He looked at Monica Reed. Her pen moved, notes. But her eyes tracked Hill when Patricia was speaking, not her notepad. She was monitoring Hill, not the conversation, waiting for something. A signal maybe, or a moment. He looked at Hill's hands. Moving when he talked, calibrated to emphasis. Too calibrated. Practiced to the point where the movement had lost its spontaneity and become a tool. Something performed rather than felt. He looked at the briefcase, and then his eyes stopped. Because there was something there. Under the edge of Hill's briefcase, against the table surface, a corner of paper was visible. Not part of any stack being presented. Not a folder tab or a document cover. A single page slid flat against the table surface, angled under the case. You would not see it if you were looking at Hill, or at Patricia, or at the city outside. You would not see it unless you were looking at the table from a slightly lower angle than anyone seated at it. Darnell was not seated at it. His angle was different. He sat with it, the knowledge of it. He looked at it and then looked away and then looked back, and it was still there, the edge of something that was being kept out of sight. He couldn't read it from where he sat, but he could see that it existed, and he could see in the practiced stillness of Monica Reed's hands something that looked like awareness. Like she knew it was there, like she was managing the knowing of it the same way Hill managed everything else in this room. Darnell looked at Patricia. She was looking at Hill, listening, the yellow-pad woman writing something beside her. Patricia's face was composed, entirely composed, but she hadn't seen what he'd seen. Her angle was wrong for it. Something moved through Darnell's chest that was not quite fear and not quite certainty, but some combination of the two. The pull of a moment you feel coming before you fully understand what it is. Victor's note in the safe. This man sees what's actually there. Patricia's words in the hall. I need someone in that room who he won't manage. Hill pressed forward. He was steering now. Darnell could feel it even without understanding all the words. The language getting warmer, more specific, building towards something. Toward an ask. Toward the moment where Patricia was supposed to feel like the obvious answer was yes. Monica Reed's pen stopped moving. She was watching Hill. Watching and waiting. And Darnell understood that the moment was coming, and that if it came and passed without him doing anything, whatever was under that briefcase would stay hidden, and whatever Patricia signed would be signed without knowing. And the question that sat in him, heavy and real, was the same question it had always been. Who am I in this room to say anything? He was nobody. He was the man who mopped the floors. Except Victor Bryant had written his name down first. And Vivian had said, you leave things better than you found them. And Patricia Johnson, who did not ask for things she didn't need, had come to him in an empty hallway at 6:30 in the morning and said, I need someone he won't manage. Hill reached forward. His hand moved toward the papers in front of Patricia. A gesture that was not quite touching them but was adjacent to touching them. An implication, a direction. Darnell's mouth opened. He had not decided to speak. He simply spoke. Excuse me. It came out quieter than he intended, but clear. Clear enough. The room registered it. The legal woman looked up. The young man turned. Monica Reed went very still in a way that was different from her earlier stillness. Hill's hand paused. Patricia looked at him, and Darnell said, with the steadiness of a man who has spent his whole life being careful and has decided just asked us to be something else. There's something on the table under your briefcase, Mr. Hill. I think Mrs. Johnson should see it. The room held its breath, and in the silence Darnell Cooper, 58 years old, widower, custodian, the man nobody saw, sat in his chair and did not look away. He hadn't planned that sentence. It had no plan behind it, no strategy, no calculation about what came next. It just came from the place where things live when you've been holding them quietly, and the moment gets heavy enough that holding stops being possible. Scott Hill turned his head, slowly. The way powerful men turned when they had been interrupted by someone they had not assigned any power to. There was a quality to that turn, a kind of controlled, deliberate patience that was actually not patience at all, but the careful management of something beneath it. He looked at Darnell, really looked, for the first time since he'd walked in, and what passed across his face was not anger, not yet, but the briefest recalibration. An adjustment, category reassignment. "I'm sorry," Hill said. His voice had the texture of a man who was deciding in real time how to handle something he hadn't anticipated. "There's something on the table," Darnell said again. "Under your case, I can see the edge of it from here." Monica Reed moved. Not much, just chin tilting down slightly, and then up, like she was double-checking something she already knew. Her pen was still. Hill smiled. It was a good smile, practiced to the point of nearly being real. "That's probably just some backup documentation I brought in case we needed reference material. Nothing relevant to Scott." Patricia Johnson said it exactly the way she said everything, calm, precise, with an absolute absence of uncertainty about whether she had the right to say it. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't add anything to the name. She just said it, and the room understood that a different person was running the conversation now. "Move the briefcase." Hill looked at her, and Darnell watched something happen in the man that he suspected Hill worked very hard to ensure no one ever saw. A small collapse, something structural, like a wall that looked solid but had always depended on not being pressed. He moved the briefcase. Slowly. With the care of a man who understood that the rate at which he moved it might still convey something salvageable. Monica Reed looked at the window. The young man from Patricia's team was looking at the paper on the table, and then at Hill, and then at Patricia and back again, following the room. Patricia reached out and picked up the document. The room was quiet enough that Darnell could hear the paper. He watched her face. She read without expression. He had seen her read documents before, from a distance, the way you observed things without meaning to when you spent years in the same building. She always read the same way, moving her eyes down the page at a steady pace, not performing focus but actually having it. She read the whole thing. It wasn't long, less than a page, maybe half a page. When she finished, she set it down. On the table in front of her precisely. The way you set something down when you want to be able to refer to it again, but you also need your hands free. She looked at Hill. "This is a secondary instrument," she said. Her voice had not changed, not in pitch, not in pace. And that, Darnell thought, was the thing about a woman who had spent 30 years in rooms like this one. The less she showed, the more it meant. It transfers controlling interest in the commercial real estate holdings of Caldwell Enterprises to an LLC registered to your name. For $1, contingent on the primary agreement being executed first. Hill opened his mouth. "It was under your briefcase," Patricia said. Face down. "You weren't going to show it to me." The legal woman had her pen above her yellow pad. "Not writing. Waiting." "Patricia," Hill said, and the switch to her first name was deliberate, a small move to reframe the relationship in the room. "I can explain the structure. There's a technical reason for the way it's drafted. It's a standard protective mechanism that my attorneys..." Brenda. Patricia looked at Monica Reed, and Darnell noticed that too. She'd called her Brenda, not Monica. "How long have you been working with Scott?" Monica Reed's stillness changed character. The pen was now motionless in a way that was different from before. Before it had been controlled. Now it was something else. Darnell watched her jaw. "About 8 months," she said. "Carefully, too carefully. Because I have a Brenda Reed in our system," Patricia said. "From the strategy division. Transferred out 18 months ago." She tilted her head. "You look quite a bit like the photograph in that file." Something happened in the room then. Darnell could feel it. A shift, the way a change in air pressure feels before weather moves through. Hill and Reed were still. Patricia was still. The legal woman had her hand flat on the yellow pad now. The young man had stopped moving entirely. Hill said, "Whatever you think." "I don't think," Patricia said. "I have a document. With your name on it, which you concealed. In my conference room." She paused, just long enough. "We're done today." She stood. That was it. That was the whole of it. She stood, and the movement communicated every single thing that needed to be communicated. and Hill looked at her and understood that there was no version of the next 10 minutes that went the way he'd planned. He gathered his papers. Monica Reed, Brenda, whoever she was, closed her portfolio and picked up her pen. They moved with the careful, unhurried quality of people, trying to leave a room without looking like they were fleeing it. Hill paused at the door. He looked at Patricia, some attempt at one final adjustment. She was looking at the document on the table. She did not look up. The door closed. The legal woman exhaled. Not loud, just the sound of a person releasing they'd been holding. Patricia remained standing. She looked at the window for a moment, at the city, at whatever the city looked like to a woman who had just watched someone try to take something she'd spent her life building and had stopped them. But only because of a man sitting in a chair against the wall who had not been expected to say anything. She turned and looked at Darnell. He was still sitting in the same chair, same position, both hands in his lap. He hadn't moved since he'd said his piece, and the thought that struck him now, in the aftermath of it, was that he still didn't know if he'd done the right thing. He'd done a thing. A real thing with real consequences that were already unfolding. Whether it was the right thing wouldn't be clear for a while yet. "You saw it from there," she said. Not accusatory, genuinely wanting to understand. "The angle," he said, sitting lower than the table. "And I wasn't looking at him, so I was looking at the table surface instead." She considered this. "My angle was wrong." "Yes." She pulled out the chair beside her and sat. Not at the head of the table, just down from it, at the side, like she was tired of being at the head of something and needed a moment of being alongside something instead. She looked at the document still on the table. "He knew about our restructuring," she said, more to herself than to him. "The timeline, the specifics, that's not public, that came from inside." "The woman," Darnell said, "Monica. She had a quality about her, Brenda Reed." Patricia rubbed the side of her thumb against her forefinger, a small unconscious movement. "She was on my strategy team. She requested a transfer 18 months ago. I approved it. I didn't. I was still in the first year with Vita and I wasn't." She stopped. "I wasn't as attentive as I should have been." Darnell didn't say anything. He let her have the sentence. The legal woman had her phone out now and was already making quiet, efficient calls. The young man had left and come back with a second attorney Darnell didn't recognize, and the two of them were conferring over something in low voices near the door. The machinery of consequence was starting up. Darnell could feel it. The weight of it, the way small decisions sent large things into motion, and then the motion took on its own gravity. He looked at his hands again. Not the mop handle, just his hands, the hands that had been wrong for this room, by every measure anyone in this building would have used, and had been exactly right for this moment anyway. He thought about Victor, the morning conversations at the cart, the questions that were actual questions. The man who had moved through buildings full of important people and chosen to stop and talk to the one person nobody else stopped for, and then had written his name down, kept it, trusted it. "Darnell, I trust this man hern but ki I muk vest chongtuanyanai." No, Victor wouldn't have said it that way. Victor had been quieter than that, more precise. This man sees what's actually there. Darnell sat with that, with all of it. The morning, the hallway, Patricia finding him in the dark at 6:30 and saying Victor's name. The way a dead man's handwriting had moved through 3 years of grief and arrived in this conference room today and done something real. Outside Atlanta was just being Atlanta, indifferent and bright and going about its business. In here something had shifted. He wasn't sure what to call it yet. He thought he might not have words for it for a while. That was okay. He'd always been comfortable letting things be what they were before he named them. Vivian had said that too. She'd said he was the only person she'd ever met who could sit with an unanswered question and not make it into a crisis. He wondered briefly what she would have said about today. He thought she would have laughed, that specific laugh she had. The one where she covered her mouth with 3 fingers and her eyes did the smiling first. She would have laughed, and then she would have said something that cut directly to the point of it. He didn't know what she would have said, but he could almost feel the shape of it. Patricia looked at him again. She had the expression of someone who had more to say, but was choosing the order carefully. "He wrote a note beside your name in that list," she said. "I told you what it said, but I didn't tell you the other thing." Darnell looked at her. At the bottom of the list, after everyone's name, He wrote one sentence, "For me." She paused. He wrote, "If you ever feel like you're alone in this, start with these people. You are not as alone as you think you are." The room was quiet. Darnell sat with it the way he sat with all the things that mattered, carefully giving them room, not rushing toward what they meant. He was a good man, he said, finally. Because it was true, and it was the right thing to say, and some true right things didn't need to be anything more than themselves. Patricia nodded, once. And for a moment, just a moment, her composure shifted in a way he'd never seen from across a hallway or through a conference room window. Not collapse, not grief, just the brief, visible weight of loss in a person who usually kept it interior, there and then tucked back. Private but real. Yes, she said, he was. The legal woman said something to her from across the room. Patricia turned. The business of it resumed. The machinery picked back up. Darnell sat for another moment and then stood, quietly, the way he stood up from every chair in every room in this building, without calling attention to the fact of it. And he walked to the door. He paused at it, not looking back, just standing in the space of it, because something was different on this side of this moment than on the other side. He wasn't sure what to do with that yet, but he felt it, the way you feel a change in temperature before you step out into it. He went back into the hallway. The floor was clean. He'd done it yesterday. He walked to the elevator, pressed the button for 8, and as the doors closed, he looked at his reflection in the brushed steel, the navy button down, the worn face, the hands at his sides, and thought, Victor picked right. Then the elevator moved and took him back to where he started. But he was not quite the same man who had arrived at this building this morning. Some things you could feel that clearly, even when you didn't have words for them yet. Especially then. The lawyers worked fast. That was the first thing Darnell noticed when he came in the next morning. The lights on the 18th floor were on at 45. The 18th was the legal department. It was never lit before 7. He paused on the service stairs landing and looked at the glow coming under the door and thought, whatever Patricia set in motion yesterday, it was already moving faster than sleep. He did his floors, methodical, starting from 8 working up. He did not go to 14, not because he was avoiding it, because 14 was not on his morning rotation on Thursdays, and he was not going to change his rotation because of what had happened in conference room B. That felt important somehow. The work stayed what it was. He stayed who he was. Inside, whatever had shifted, the shape of the day needed to hold. The building filled up around him the way it always did. The early arrivals first, the anxious ones, the ambitious ones, the ones who treated extra hours like currency they were saving towards something. Then the steady stream from 7:30 onward. Then the late ones who had learned that confidence read the same as punctuality if you walked fast enough. Nobody stopped him. Nobody said anything different than they ever said, which was almost nothing, and that was fine. That was always fine. What was not fine was the thing sitting in his chest that he had no category for, not pride exactly, not relief. Something adjacent to both, with an edge on it he hadn't expected. Like something had been unlocked that now needed somewhere to go. He was restocking towel dispensers on 12 when his phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize, Atlanta area code. He let it buzz. He finished the dispenser. Then he looked at the message. This is Karen Webb from Caldwell Legal. Mrs. Johnson has asked that you come to the 18th floor at 11 this morning. Conference room is reserved. It's not optional. He read it twice. Not optional. He almost smiled. At 10:58 he was at the elevator bank on ground level. The 18th floor required a specific badge level he didn't have. He knew this because he had never needed it. The service access went up to 16. Above that was executive and legal, and in 12 years he had never had occasion to go above 16. He pressed the call button and waited and thought about whether he should have told someone. His supervisor, maybe. But what would he have said? I stopped a fraudulent deal yesterday and now I've been summoned to a legal meeting. Even inside his own head it sounded improbable. Like something that had happened to someone else and he'd been told about it secondhand. The elevator opened. A woman was inside. Early 40s, reading glasses on a lanyard around her neck. A tablet tucked under one arm, moving with the specific efficiency of someone who solved problems for a living and found inefficiency physically uncomfortable. She looked at him. At the floor number he'd pressed 18 for him herself before he could reach for it. You're Darnell Cooper, Not a question. Yes, Karen Webb, I sent you the text. She looked forward at the doors. We're cleared for 18 today. I added you to the access log this morning, he said. Appreciate it, she said. What you did yesterday was either very smart or very lucky. He thought about that. Might be both. She made a sound that was close to a laugh, not quite. It's both, she said. But the lucky part is that it worked. The smart part is that you spoke up at all. The doors opened on 18. Come on. The conference room on 18 was different from the one on 14. Smaller. Walls lined with built-in bookshelves that had actual books on them, which Darnell found notable. Most of the decorative shelves in this building had been styled with objects, not books. A long credenza against the far wall. No view of the city from here, just the interior of the building's atrium shaft. A column of light going up and through the center. Quieta. Contained. 3 people were already seated. Karen Webb took a chair and opened her tablet. A man Darnell didn't know, 50s, with the look of someone who had been an athlete a long time ago and had kept just enough of it, sat at the end with a yellow legal pad that already had 2 pages filled. And Patricia. She was at the center, not the head, the center, which told Darnell something about how she ran rooms. She sat where she could reach everything equally, not where she could dominate everything from above. She looked up when he came in. Sit anywhere, he sat across from her. This is Gerald Park, our outside counsel, she said, gesturing to the athletic man. He's handling the next steps on Hill and Reed. Karen, you've met. She folded her hands on the table. I want to ask you some questions, Darnell, and I want you to answer them as specifically as you can. He nodded. In the meeting yesterday, before you said anything, when did you first notice the document under Hill's case? He thought back carefully. He was precise about this kind of thing. About 20 minutes in, maybe 25. He'd shifted in his seat and the case moved slightly and I caught the edge of it. Did you see anything else before that? Any other behavior that struck you as off? His assistant, Darnell said. Monica Reed, or whatever her name is. Karen Webb typed. Patricia's voice had the quality of someone who already had an answer and was testing whether the witness had arrived at the same place independently. She was watching him instead of the conversation, Darnell said. When someone asked something or when Mrs. Johnson pushed back on a point, most assistants tracked the room. She tracked Hill, like she was waiting for a cue. Gerald Park wrote something, anything else, the way he placed the case. It wasn't how you'd set something down if you were just putting it on a table. The angle was deliberate. Low, close to the edge, like it had been positioned. Patricia looked at Gerald Park. He placed it that way before the meeting started, Park said. We have camera footage from the hallway showing him entering the conference room 7 minutes early with Reed. She set up the materials. He placed the case himself, which meant it was not an accident, which meant it had been planned from the moment they walked in, which meant they had come into that room intending to leave with something they had no right to take. Darnell sat with that. The cleanness of the wrongness of it. Here's what we know, Park said, and he shifted to address Darnell now as directly as he'd been addressing Patricia, which Darnell noticed. Not because it was unusual for a lawyer to speak to a witness, but because of the quality of the directness. Eye contact, level. Scott Hill incorporated an LLC in Delaware 14 months ago. The sole purpose of that entity, based on its charters, was to acquire commercial real estate holdings in the Southeast. He identified Caldwell's portfolio, which is substantial, as the primary target. He needed an insider to understand the structure of the company, the timing of the leadership transition after Victor Bryant's death, and the specific vulnerabilities in the current governance setup. He paused. Brenda Reed, who you know as Monica Reed, applied to work at Caldwell 2 years ago under her actual name. She worked in strategy for 6 months before Hill made contact with her. When she had what Hill needed, she resigned. The Monica Reed identity is a legal name variant, her middle name. She's used it before. Darnell looked at the table. Then back up. She gave him the timing. She gave him everything, Karen Webb said. Flat, not angry, just the fact of it. The restructuring plan. The board meeting schedule. The specific window when a new equity agreement would be easiest to pass, because half the board was focused on the operational transition. The window is closing in 3 weeks, Patricia said. That's why Hill wanted to move now. Not because the deal was ready. Because our vulnerability was expiring. Darnell thought about that. about the precision of it, the patience it took to plan something 18 months in advance, to put a person inside a company and wait, to identify the exact moment when grief and transition left a target exposed. What happens now? He asked. Civil suit for fraudulent misrepresentation and breach of fiduciary duty, Park said. The secondary instrument is evidence of intent. Reed's employment records are being subpoenaed. Hill will try to call it a drafting error. He's already had his attorney reach out this morning. A short pause. It's not going to hold. Patricia looked at Darnell. You understand that you'll probably need to provide a statement. What you saw, from where, the sequence of it. That's fine. It may also become part of a deposition at some point. Also fine. She studied him for a moment. He let her. He wasn't going to pretend the calm he felt was more than it was, but it was real. He'd said what he'd seen. He would say it again. There was nothing complicated about telling the truth in his experience. The complicated part was deciding to. After that, it was just words in the right order. Okay, Patricia said. And that was the end of the meeting. Except it wasn't, because she looked at him as the others were gathering their things. Just looked. Like she was still trying to calibrate something. Thank you, she said. Victor would have said something too, Darnell told her. If he'd seen it. She looked at him for one more moment. Then yes, he would have. The next 3 days moved strangely. Darnell went to work, did his floors, kept his rotation. The building around him behaved exactly as it always did. The urgency, the movement, the people in transit between important things. And Darnell moved through it the same way he always had. Quietly, carefully, present, without being obtrusive. But something had changed in the texture of it. On Friday morning, he was mopping near the elevators on 10 when one of the senior directors, a woman named Chandra Williams who ran something on the financial side that he'd never fully understood, stopped and looked at him. Not through him, at him. You're Darnell, right? Facilities? Yes, ma'am. She nodded slowly, like confirming something she'd heard. Good, she said, and walked on. He thought about that word for the rest of the morning. Just good. Like she knew something had happened and had formed a view about it, and had reduced that view to a single syllable. He didn't know how many people in the building knew what he'd done in that conference room. He didn't know how information moved through places like this when something went wrong and then got stopped. He suspected it moved fast. He didn't mind. He wasn't embarrassed by what he'd done. He wasn't proud in a way that needed recognition. He had a different relationship to the building now, and he was still working out what that meant. Saturday he stayed home, did laundry, read the sports section even though he didn't follow any of the teams particularly anymore. Vivian had been the sports one. She'd cared about the Falcons with a kind of personal investment that Darnell had never understood and had loved about her completely. He still read the football coverage sometimes. It felt like keeping a channel open to something. Sunday morning he drove past the cemetery. He didn't stop. He rarely stopped now. Not because he didn't want to, but because he'd found that visiting the grave gave him something less useful than just being in the world she'd moved through. He knew where she was. She wasn't there. She was in the coffee routine and the 2-minute rule and the way he kept the apartment clean because she'd kept it clean. She was in what he did, not where he went to stand above the ground. He drove past and went home and pressed his good shirt for Monday. Monday morning at 7:43, Patricia Johnson was in the hallway on the 14th floor, not looking for him. At least, that was his first thought. But she turned when the elevator opened, and he came out with his cart. And the way she turned said she'd been aware of the elevator and been waiting to see who came out of it, which meant she was looking for him. He stopped the cart. "Walk with me," she said, which was a thing people said when they wanted to talk without the architecture of a conference room around the conversation. Darnell had heard executives say it to each other. He had never had it said to him. He left the cart near the utility closet and walked. They went toward the south windows, the big ones looking out at the city. She stopped in front of them and looked out in front of one for a moment before turning to face him, and he thought that this was probably how she handled most conversations that mattered. She put the city behind her so that the person she was talking to had to look at her instead of looking past her. "Hill's attorney has already implied that your account might be questioned," she said. "Not your character specifically, but your position, the angle." Whether someone in a support role has the standing to make an observation that derails a business negotiation. Darnell considered this. Do they have a legal basis for that? No, it's posturing. She said it simply. But posturing has a purpose. They're establishing a narrative in case this goes further. The story they'll tell is that a misunderstanding by an unqualified observer caused a legitimate deal to collapse. And the document? They're calling it a draft, a placeholder. Something that should have been removed from the case before the meeting and wasn't because of an administrative error. She watched him. It's not a position that holds up. The camera footage contradicts it. Reed's employment history contradicts it. The Charter of Hills LLC contradicts it, but they'll say it. Darnell nodded. People say things. They do. And they need a story, he said. Even a bad one. Because a bad story is harder to work against than no story. Patricia looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen from her before. Not surprise exactly. Something more considered. Like she was adding information to a model she was already building. Park thinks it won't go to trial, she said. He thinks Hill will settle. The exposure is too significant and the evidence is too clean. She paused. But I want you to know what the next few weeks might look like. In case anyone approaches you, asks questions, tries to get you to characterize what you saw differently. They won't get that from me. I know, she said, simply, without ceremony. That's why I'm telling you instead of warning you. There was a difference in that. He felt it clearly. Telling versus warning. Assumed a person who could receive information and use it. The other assumed a person who needed protecting from their own choices. He looked at the city, then back at her. Can I ask you something, he said. Yes, Brenda Reed. She worked here for 6 months. Did she? Was there anything that should have been a sign? Something that was missed? Patricia's jaw moved slightly. A small thing. The ghost of something she'd already been sitting with. In retrospect, there are always signs. She asked detailed questions about the governance structure. She had access to board scheduling. She was good at being helpful in ways that required people to tell her things. A pause. But I was managing a company that had just lost the person who understood its bones better than anyone. And I was doing it while also managing. She stopped. Grief doesn't go as on a schedule, Darnell said. She looked at him. It just doesn't, he said. I know that. 3 years is nothing. You can be 5 years in and still have a Tuesday that takes you apart. She was quiet for a moment. The city was bright and useless behind her. Victor used to say that grief was just love with nowhere to go, she said finally. I thought it was sentimental when he said it. Now I think he was being precise. Darnell sat with that. Love with nowhere to go. Victor Bryant, who had stopped at a supply cart to ask about marble restoration, who had written a custodian's name at the top of a list of trusted people, had also understood grief well enough to say something like that. It made a kind of sense. The men who looked at the people, other people looked past, usually had some understanding of what it felt like to carry things that had no obvious place. He was precise, Darnell said. That's the word for him. He was precise about the things that mattered. Yes. She breathed through her nose. He talked about you. I didn't know it was you at the time. He'd say the man on ATM sometimes, the way you'd say a person you respected without needing to explain why. I assumed it was another executive, someone I hadn't met. I didn't. She shook her head slightly. I didn't ask. You didn't need to, Darnell said. He knew that was enough. She looked at him steadily. It shouldn't have been enough. And he understood what she meant by that. Not guilt exactly. Something more active. The decision to do differently with what she now knew. He respected the precision of it. She wasn't performing regret. She was making a record of something she intended to change. The board is meeting Thursday, she said, shifting. Back to the business of it. I'm going to address the Hill situation formally. The restructuring of our information security protocols, and some personnel decisions. He waited. She looked at him directly. I'd like you to consider a different role. Not instead of what you do. I'm not asking you to stop working in this building. I know that's yours. But I want to create something. A position that doesn't have a good name yet because it doesn't quite exist anywhere I know of. Someone who interfaces between the operational side of this company, the actual daily function of it, and the leadership level. Someone who tells the truth about what's actually happening at the ground level. Someone that people at that level won't manage because they don't think to. Darnell was quiet. It would come with a salary adjustment. Office access to floors you currently can't reach. A title we'd work out. She paused. And a guarantee that your current work, your early access, your routine, none of that changes unless you want it to. He thought about it. He thought about it the way he thought about everything that mattered. Carefully, without rushing toward the answer. Can I ask why you're doing this now? He said. Not why you want to, but why now, this week? Because this week showed me a gap in how I run this company, she said. Victor would have caught what Hill was doing earlier. Not because he was smarter. Because he was connected to the ground level of this place in a way I've allowed myself not to be since he died. I buried myself in the top floors. I managed from altitude. She looked at the window. You don't see the cracks from altitude. No, Darnell agreed. You don't. I'm not asking you to be a spy, she said, and I'm not asking you to report on people. I'm asking you to be present and honest. The same thing you've been doing for 12 years for free. I'd like to make it official, he said. Give me a few days. She nodded immediately. No pressure, no performance of patience designed to create pressure. Just, okay. Which was itself a kind of answer about who she was, this woman who had run a company through grief and had nearly had it taken from her and was now sitting in front of a decision she hadn't planned for. She was someone who respected the time a real answer required. Take the time you need, she said. He went back to his cart. He thought about it all day. While he worked. While he ate lunch in the break room on 7. The small one, not the main one. The one nobody used except the overnight staff and the occasional person who needed to not be seen eating. He thought about it on the drive home. He thought about it standing at the window over the parking lot with his coffee going cold in his hand. What he thought specifically was this. He was 58 years old. He had worked with his hands his entire adult life. He had done it well. He had done it with care and with something that was as close to craftsmanship as cleaning could be. And none of that was small. He did not feel small about it. He had never felt small about it, or at least, he had learned not to. Not every day. Some days were harder. But this was something else being offered. Something that acknowledged a different capacity. And the question was not whether he deserved it. The question was whether it was true. Whether Patricia was seeing something real, or whether she was reacting to a single moment and would, in 3 weeks, find that the moment had been exception rather than a pattern. He thought about Victor, about the list, about the fact that Victor had been watching long enough to be certain. Victor had not been a man who made gestures. He had been precise. That was the word Patricia used, and it was right. A precise man putting your name on a list was not sentiment. It was assessment. He trusted Victor's assessment, and Victor had trusted his. He set the coffee mug down, rinse it, set it in the drying rack. Okay, he thought, not to anyone. Just to the kitchen. To the ordinary kitchen of his ordinary apartment on the 3rd floor of a building in East Point. Okay, Tuesday. He came in at 4:45 as usual, 8-floor sweep. Then 9, 10, 11. He was on 12 when he heard voices from the small conference room at the end of the hall, a room that was almost never used mid-morning. He moved closer, not to eavesdrop, because his job included checking whether rooms had been used and needed attention. He heard Hill's name, and then a different name, the board member, Thomas Richardson, who sat on the Caldwell board and whose office was on 16. And then he heard something that stopped him outside the door. If she moves on this publicly, there are 5 years of decisions that get reopened. The Meridian acquisition, the Park Street deal. Victor made those calls and Caldwell backed them, and if anyone starts pulling at the structure of how decisions were made. The other voice. Lower. That's not Hill's play anymore. He's done. I'm saying there are other people who'd rather this didn't go to full litigation. Darnell stood in the hallway, both hands on the cart handle, absolutely still. She's not going to settle, the first voice, Richardson said. I've known Patricia Johnson for 20 years. She does not settle for things that happen to her. She prosecutes them. Then somebody needs to talk to her before Thursday. Somebody. Richardson's voice had something in it now. Something careful, meaning who exactly. Silence. Darnell moved away from the door. Back down the hall, methodical, ordinary looking, the man with the cart. But his mind was moving fast, not panicked. Focused. The way it moved in the conference room when he'd watched Hill's hands and Monica Reed's stillness and the edge of a document catching the light. Richardson was on the board. He would be in the Thursday meeting. And there were Apparently, people who had interests in this not going further, people whose names hadn't come up, people who had been comfortable with the architecture of how Caldwell made decisions before Patricia started pulling at it. This was not just Hill. Hill had been the mechanism, but Hill's information had been specific, detailed, more detailed possibly than one 6-month employee could have gathered, even a careful one. He needed to tell Patricia. And he did not know exactly how to tell her that the hole might be bigger than they'd thought. That the thing she was planning to address on Thursday might be the surface of something with more depth to it. That the man she would be sitting across from in that boardroom, Thomas Richardson, 20-year acquaintance, might be in that room with a different agenda. He finished 12, moved to 13. At 10 o'clock, he sent Patricia a text. Short, need to speak with you today. Not urgent enough to interrupt your morning. Urgent enough that it shouldn't wait until Thursday. She replied in 4 minutes. 2 p.m. My office. Her office was on the 20th floor. He had cleaned it twice a week for 3 years. He knew the room the way he knew every room he maintained. The layout, the spots that needed attention, the window that looked west and caught the afternoon light badly and required cleaning more often than the others. He knew the small photograph on the credenza behind the desk, the man and woman at what looked like a groundbreaking ceremony, hard hats, big smiles. Victor younger, Patricia younger, the beginning of something. He had never been in the room while she was in it. She was at her desk when he came in. She gestured at the chair across from her, a real chair, not a sidewall observer position, and he sat in it and told her what he'd heard. Verbatim. The voices, the content, the specific phrases he'd caught. She listened without interrupting, without moving much, the stillness that was her particular quality of attention. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then, Richardson. I don't know for certain it was him. I didn't see through the door. The voice? I've heard him in the halls, enough times that I'd say 80% certain. She nodded, turned her chair slightly and looked at the window. The light was hitting it wrong at this hour. Darnell noticed that the glass needed cleaning. He noticed it and let the noticing go. Thomas Richardson has been on this board for 11 years, she said. Not to him, to the window, to the version of the problem she was working through. He was Victor's pick. Victor trusted his judgment. I have trusted his judgment. I'm sorry, Darnell said. She turned back. Don't be. This is better than not knowing. Her eyes were steady, clear. Whatever she was feeling about Richardson was already being filed somewhere internal, organized, prepared to be acted on rather than sat in. The Meridian acquisition he mentioned, that closed 4 years ago. Victor structured it. Richardson was on the committee that approved it. If there was anything in that deal that didn't bear scrutiny, it would give him a reason to want this to not go to litigation, Darnell said. Because litigation opens everything. Yes, they sat with that. What are you going to do? He asked. She looked at him, and for a moment, just a moment, she didn't look like the CEO of anything. She looked like a woman in the middle of something she hadn't planned for, with more of it ahead of her than behind her, trying to figure out how to stand inside it. I'm going to talk to Park, she said, tonight. We're going to go through the Meridian records, and I'm going to walk into Thursday's board meeting, knowing exactly who is in that room and why. She picked up her pen, set it down, and I'm going to need you there. Darnell looked at her. Not to say anything, she said, just to be there. Because you have a way of seeing what's actually in a room, and I don't want to be the only one in that room who does. He thought about the difference between being used as a tool and being trusted as a person. He thought about how you could tell the difference, that the person who trusted you told you why they needed you, and the person using you didn't bother. Patricia had always told him why. I'll be there, he said. She nodded then. You said you need a few days to think about the position. I did. Have you thought? He looked at the photograph on the credenza. Victor and Patricia at the beginning. Hard hats, the ground not yet broken. Yes, he said. She waited. I'll take it, Darnell said, on one condition. Name it. I still come in at 4:45. She looked at him for one long moment, and then something happened in her face that he had not seen there before. Not the grief, and not the composure, and not the professional stillness. Something warmer. Something that was almost, not quite, but almost the beginning of something like relief. 4:45, she said. Done. He stood up, moved the door, paused. Bring Park in early tomorrow, he said, before the building fills up. That's when the real conversations happen here. When nobody thinks anyone is listening. He went back to his floors. He had a lot left to do before Thursday. Darnell did not sleep well Wednesday night, not because he was afraid, because his mind was doing the thing it did when it had more information than it had finished sorting. Running the pieces slowly, testing arrangements, looking for the shape of what was coming. He lay in the dark and let it work. The coffee would still be there at 4:45. The cart would be in the closet. The floors would need what they always needed, but Thursday was different. He got up at 4:30 instead of 4:45. The extra 15 minutes were not dramatic. He just needed them. He made his coffee, drank it standing at the window. The parking lot was wet from overnight rain. A streetlight at the far end was flickering. He'd noticed it last week. He'd put in the maintenance request. Nobody had fixed it yet. He thought, some things you could fix yourself. Some things you had to report and wait. He thought about Richardson, about the voice in the hallway, about the specific phrase, somebody needs to talk to her before Thursday. It was Wednesday night and nobody had talked to her, which meant either they'd decided not to, or they were still deciding, or there was a different plan. None of those options were the same. He needed to think about which one it was. The most dangerous was the last one. Because if there was a different plan, if Richardson and whoever was on the other end of that conversation had decided that a direct approach to Patricia wouldn't work and had shifted to something else, then the threat had changed shape without warning. And changed shape threats were the ones you missed. He got to the building at 5:10. Derek at the security desk looked up, nodded, then looked at the clock. Early today. Couldn't sit still, Darnell said. Derek laughed. Small, board meeting thing. Darnell looked at him. You heard about that? Derek shrugged. I hear most things. I'm here when the talking starts and when it stops. In between, people forget I exist. He said it without bitterness, just as a fact about the nature of desks and overnight shifts and the particular visibility of certain jobs. Darnell understood that without needing it explained. Anything unusual last night? He asked. Derek considered. Richardson's assistant came in at 10:30. Out by 11:15. Conference room 15 was signed out to a guest name that doesn't match anyone in the visitor log for the day. Darnell was still. You log that? I log everything. Nobody reads it. Derek looked at his desk screen. Usually. Can you print me the last 48 hours? Derek looked at him, then looked at the badge Darnell was wearing, the standard one, the same one for 12 years. Then he looked at Darnell's face. You know what, Derek said. I don't think that's a problem. The log was 4 pages. Darnell took it to the utility room on 8 and sat on an overturned mop bucket under the fluorescent light and read it twice. The guest name on conference room 15 was an LLC, one he didn't recognize, but the timestamp and Richardson's assistant and the 45 minutes of it that made a picture he didn't like. He photographed the relevant pages with his phone. He sent them to Karen Webb at 5:48 in the morning. She replied at 6:02. How did you get this? He replied, I asked. A longer pause. Then I'm forwarding this to Park. Don't go anywhere. He went to his cart and started floor 8. At 7:15, Park himself called. Darnell answered while he was changing out a mop head. Park's voice was different on the phone, stripped of the conference room composure, more direct. The LLC in that log, we know it. It's connected to a private equity firm that has an existing stake in one of Hill's other ventures. This is not small, Darnell. How not small? The kind of not small that means Hill wasn't working alone from the beginning. The kind where the money behind the strategy is several steps removed and counting on this to move fast and clean. A pause. The kind that gets very uncomfortable when it doesn't. Darnell pressed the mop into the bucket. What do they do when it gets uncomfortable? Usually, they cut the visible part loose, Hill, and try to keep the deeper structure intact, which means making sure the investigation stays surface level. Another pause, which means applying pressure at the source. Patricia. Yes. Darnell looked at the floor he'd just mopped. Clean, reflective under the light. Then she needs to know before she walks into that board meeting, he said. She already does, Park said. I just got off the phone with her. She wants you in that room at 10. Not on the side wall this time. Darnell looked at the mop in his hand. Then he set it carefully against the wall. Handle straight, head down the right way, the way he always left things. "I'll be there," he said. He had 4 floors left. He did all of them. Everyone. Clean and thorough and in the right order. Because that was the work, and it didn't stop because other things were happening. That was the thing people who didn't do his kind of work didn't understand. The building needed what it needed regardless of what was going on at the top of it. The floors didn't care about board meetings or fraudulent instruments or private equity firms working through layers of distance to take something that wasn't theirs. They just needed to be cleaned. And Darnell needed to clean them. Because that was how he arrived at things, through the work. Through the steady application of care to what was in front of him. It was how he'd arrived at this day. All of it. 12 years of being the person who showed up before the building, woke up, and did the things nobody noticed until they weren't done. He finished at 9:32. He went to the men's room on 14, checked his shirt. Same navy button-down from before 4. Pressed again last night. The crease at the collar was back, same place. He looked at it, left it. Some things you lived with. He was not the janitor going to a board meeting this time. He was not sure yet what he was. But it was something new. And new things, in his experience, didn't come with categories already made for them. You just walked into the room. And you were present. And you told the truth about what you saw. He rode the elevator to the 20th floor at 9:55. The access came through now. His new badge level, added to the system this morning by Karen Webb. The door opened and he stepped out into the wide, air-carpeted hallway of the top executive floor. And for a moment he just stood there. Not overwhelmed, not performing anything. Just standing in a space he had never stood in while the building was awake, and letting it be new. The boardroom was at the end of the hall. Through the glass panel beside the door, he could see the long table. The chairs filling. The faces he recognized from hallways and elevator rides, and 12 years of parallel orbits in the same building. And at the head of it, not the center this time, the head Patricia Johnson. Straight, composed, ready. She looked up when he appeared at the glass. And she nodded. Not the brief professional nod from the first morning. Something different. The nod of a person who had decided something and was glad of the decision. Darnell opened the door. Walked in, found a chair, not on the side wall, at the table. Where Patricia had placed a notepad and a glass of water, where no one was sitting yet, across us from Thomas Richardson, who looked up when Darnell sat and registered something in his face that was not recognition. Just adjustment. The same kind Hill had made. Category reassignment. Richardson looked at Patricia. Patricia looked at Darnell, and Darnell put both hands on the table flat and looked back at Richardson and waited for the room to show him what was there. Thomas Richardson had the kind of face that had learned to be readable. That was the thing Darnell noticed first, sitting across from him at the board table. Not unreadable, readable. Deliberately, carefully readable. Open in the way that certain men learned to be open when they had spent decades in rooms where trust was currency and the appearance of trustworthiness was the thing that kept the currency flowing. He looked like a reasonable man. He looked like a man who had seen a lot and remained steady through it. He looked like the kind of person you'd want on your board. Darnell had cleaned this building for 12 years. He had watched a lot of faces. Richardson's looked at him the way you look at a thing that has appeared in the wrong place. Not hostile, not even impolite, just the brief, barely visible recalibration of a man who had planned the architecture of this morning and was now adjusting for an element he hadn't accounted for. The room filled. 8 board members total. Karen Webb at the far end, tablet open. Gerald Park standing near the wall, not seated, which said something about how he intended to function today. Patricia at the head. Darnell at the table, hands flat. The notepad in front of him that he hadn't asked for and didn't intend to use, but which said by its placement that someone expected him to be here in a real way. Not a sidewall way, a table way. Patricia opened without preamble. Last week, Scott Hill came into this building with a secondary instrument designed to transfer control of Caldwell's commercial real estate holdings to an entity he controlled. That document was concealed during the negotiation. It was discovered before any agreement was executed. She looked around the table. Level, deliberate. Gerald Park will walk through the legal status of the matter. But before he does, I want to address something else. Richardson was still. So still that his stillness had a quality to it. The stillness of a man who had decided in advance not to move. In the process of investigating how Hill had access to information specific to our internal restructuring timeline, Patricia continued, a number of things came to light, including a visitor log entry from Wednesday night, conference room 15, an LLC whose connections I'd like Gerald to describe. Park stepped forward. He had a single sheet of paper. He set it on the table and slid it toward the center. The LLC listed in the visitor log is a holding entity connected to a private equity firm called Whitmore Capital. Whitmore has a 14% stake in a real estate venture Hill has been developing in South Carolina. Hill's approach to Caldwell was not independent. It was structured with Whitmore's backing and, we believe, with information that went beyond what Brenda Reed could have provided in 6 months. Silence. The Meridian acquisition, Patricia said. 4 years ago, Richardson, you chaired the committee, and there it was. Not an accusation, just a name and a fact and a pause afterward. Patricia letting the geometry of it speak before anyone else said a word. Richardson looked at Patricia. Patricia. His voice was the voice of a man attempting to reclaim his position in a room by using the familiar. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything, she said. I'm asking if you know the name Whitmore Capital. A beat too long. Just one beat, but Darnell caught it. He watched Richardson's hands and he caught it. I've heard of them, Richardson said. They're active in the Southeast market. And in the Meridian deal, Patricia said. They held a passive stake in the seller entity, which means they had a financial interest in the terms of the sale. And you chaired the committee that approved those terms. That's a matter of public record, Richardson said. There was full disclosure. There was disclosure to Victor, Patricia said. I have the filing. He signed the conflict acknowledgement. I didn't know about it until last night. She paused. Victor trusted you. He signed it because you told him the stake was immaterial, was it? Another beat, longer this time. The room was not breathing. You're making an implication, Richardson said, that I want on record I consider completely unfounded. I haven't made an implication, Patricia said. I've asked a question. She was good at this. Darnell had not fully understood until this moment how good she was at this. The architecture of her approach, the sequence, the specific, the patient placement of each piece before adding the next team, was the work of a woman who had spent 3 years grieving and running a company simultaneously and had come out the other side with a capacity for precision that most people didn't develop in a lifetime. We'll be requesting a full audit of the Meridian file, Park said, including all communications related to the committee approval. This is standard procedure when a conflict disclosure is reviewed in the context of a subsequent investigation. Richardson looked at Park, then at Patricia, then briefly, quickly at Darnell, and Darnell looked back, which was the whole of it. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just looked back, steady and present, and Richardson understood. Darnell could see that he understood, that this was not a man who had ended up in this room by accident, that someone had put him here because of what he could see, and that he had already seen enough. Richardson said, I'd like to have my attorney present before this goes further. That's your right, Patricia said. We'll pause on the Meridian matter until your counsel is available. But I want to be clear about one thing before we move to the rest of the agenda. She looked at him directly. Victor built this company. He built it with integrity and with care for the people inside it and outside it. Whatever happened in the Meridian deal, whatever the audit finds, this company is going to be what he intended it to be, not what someone at this table decided they could take out of it. Richardson said nothing. We'll be in touch through counsel, Patricia said. Closing it. Done. Moving forward. The rest of the meeting was 40 minutes of operational items that Darnell did not follow closely because his mind was working through what he watched. The room had contained something dangerous, and Patricia had walked into it knowing exactly what she was walking into, and had handled it with the kind of control that came from preparations, but also from something harder to name. From knowing who she's in the room and not needing anyone else to confirm it. When it ended and people filed out, Richardson left without looking at Darnell again. Darnell stayed seated until the room was nearly empty. Park stopped beside him on his way out. Nice work with the log. Derek did the work, Darnell said. I just asked. Park looked at him for a moment. That's the thing about asking, he said. Most people don't. Then he was gone. Patricia was at the far end of the table, sorting folders. The last board member left. The door closed, and it was just the two of them in the room where everything had tipped, again on the weight of what a quiet person had noticed. She looked up. "You okay?" He almost laughed, because it was the right question and also an unexpected one. "I'm all right, you. I've been better." She set the folders down. "Honest, no performance of strength right now. Just the fact of it. I've also been worse. Richardson will lawyer up," Darnell said, "and the audit will take time." "Yes, and Whitmore will distance themselves from Hill as fast as they can." "Yes, and some of it might not be provable," he said. She looked at him. "Some of it won't be," she agreed. "That's the nature of things built to be unprovable. You get the surface. You don't always get the depth." He nodded. "But you get enough to know where to look." "Yes," she said. "You get enough to know where to look." She picked up the sheet Park had left on the table, looked at it for a moment, then set it back down and looked at Darnell with an expression he was starting to recognize. The one that said she was about to say something she'd been holding for a while, and had decided it was time. "I want to tell you something," she said, "and I want you to just hear it. You don't have to respond." He waited. "The night I found Victor's list, it was about 5 weeks after he died. I was going through the safe because there were documents I needed, and I kept putting it off because opening the safe felt like the last thing I hadn't done yet. The last physical thing that was still his in a way I hadn't touched." She was precise about this, just as she was precise about everything. Not emotional in a way that was performed, just accurate. "I found the list, and I read all the names. And most of them I knew. His associates, an attorney who'd been his friend since law school, his sister, and then your name, and the note beside it." She paused. "I sat on the floor of that room for almost an hour," she said, "which is not something I do. I don't sit in floors. I'm not a floor-sitting person." Darnell almost smiled. "But I did. Because reading his handwriting, his specific handwriting, which I'd been seeing for 31 years, made him real again in a way that had stopped being available to me. And the fact that he had thought to write your name, thought to prepare, thought to hand something forward to me that I would need after he was gone." She stopped. "I was angry at him for 3 minutes, for leaving. And then I was grateful for another 24. And then I was both, which is where I've been ever since." The city outside was doing what it always did, bright and indifferent and completely without knowledge of any of this. "He was thinking ahead," Darnell said. "Even then, he was always thinking ahead. It was his best quality and his most exhausting one." She looked at the photograph, not the one on the credenza. That was in her office. Here there was no photograph, just the table and the chairs and the window. He used to say that the difference between a good decision and a right one was that as a good decision solved the problem in front of you, and a right decision made room for the problems coming. He was always trying to make room. Darnell thought about that, about the list, about the name written at the top of it. A man thinking about the future from inside, a present that was running out, finding the people who would still be there when he wasn't, making a small record of his trust to hand forward through time. "He made room for this," Darnell said. "Yes," Patricia said, "he did." They sat with that for a moment, together in the quiet of a room that had held something difficult this morning and had come through it without breaking. That was the thing about rooms. They held what happened in them, and then they released it and became ordinary again. But the people who had been in them carried it differently. "I want to tell you something too," Darnell said. She looked at him. "I went to the funeral," he said. "Victor's. I didn't belong there, not in any official way. I wasn't family, wasn't a colleague in any category anyone would have recognized, Days. I went because he was the only person in that building who had ever made me feel like what I did there meant something to somebody. Not to the floors, to somebody." He looked at his hands. "I stood in the back. I didn't sign anything. I left before the end because I didn't want to be in the receiving line and not be able to explain why I was there." Patricia was watching him. "I said something to him," Darnell said. "Just to myself. Standing there, I said. I told him thank you. Because I hadn't gotten to say it when he was alive. You don't think to say it to a person while they're there. You think you'll have more time. You never have more time," Patricia said. "Low, certain." "No," he said. "You don't." The room was quiet for another moment, and then Patricia stood up. Not abruptly. Just the movement of a woman who had done what she needed to do in this room and was ready to do the next thing. Darnell stood too. They walked to the door together, which was different from the other times they'd walked at places. Not her leading and him following. Just two people moving in the same direction. The position, she said in the hall. I'm going to formalize it today. Title is going to be Director of Operational Integrity. Karen is drafting the documentation. That's a real title, Darnell said. It's a real position. And the board. The board will vote on it. Minus Richardson, who has excused himself from board activities until the audit is complete. A beat, I expect it will pass. He nodded, okay. You'll need to meet with Karen about compensation. And there's an orientation process for the executive floors, badge levels, access protocols, that kind of thing. I know the building already, Darnell said. Yes, Patricia said. That's rather the point. The weeks that followed had the quality of a season changing. Not dramatic. Not sudden. The kind of change that was already underway before you noticed it. And when you did notice it, you couldn't say exactly when it had started. Just that the light was different. The temperature was different. The feel of being in the world was different, in some way you couldn't fully articulate but didn't need to. Darnell still came in at 4:45. He still started on 8, still worked in the same rotation. Now when he moved through the building in those early hours, he moved through it differently. Not in how he walked or where he went, in what he was carrying. He was carrying the knowledge that what he saw in those hours was being received somewhere, that it mattered to someone who could do something with it, that the years of invisible attention had found a direction. The audit of the Meridian acquisition took 6 weeks. Gerald Park ran it with a team of outside forensic accountants. Darnell was not involved in the audit directly. That was not his area, and he knew the edges of what he was for. His job was not to investigate. His job was to see. The investigation was other people's work, but he had given them the thread. The visitor log, the specific names, the sense that what had seemed like a targeted attack on a current deal was actually the surface of something older. The audit found what Park had suspected it might find. Not criminal conduct, not definitively, not provably, not in the way that would survive a criminal standard, but conflicts that had not been fully disclosed. Votes on decisions where disclosed conflicts had been characterized as immaterial when the math examined carefully suggested otherwise. A pattern rather than a single incident. The kind of thing that happened when a board member had relationships that were never quite clean and had learned over time to manage the optics well enough that no one looked closely at the substance. Richardson's attorneys negotiated. 3 months after the board meeting, he resigned from the board. No lawsuit, no admission. A carefully worded statement about stepping back from board responsibilities to focus on personal priorities. The kind of exit that left everything unprovable and nothing ununderstood. Hill's civil case moved forward. It would take a year, maybe more. But the secondary instrument was evidence. And Reed's employment history was evidence. And the charter of the Delaware LLC evidence. And Park had more than enough to make the process deeply uncomfortable for anyone who had preferred the outcome Hill had been working toward. Whitmore Capital went quiet. They did what entities like them did when a mechanism failed. They retracted the visible parts and waited. They would find another angle eventually. Patricia knew this. Park knew it. Darnell knew it. But not today. Not here. October arrived and the city went through its version of fall. Atlanta's fall was subtle. Not the dramatic color and cold of further north, but a moderation of the heat, a shift in the quality of the afternoon light, something in the air that said the year was turning. Darnell noticed it on his drive-in. He always noticed seasonal changes early. He'd spent enough early mornings in the city to have a precise relationship with the calibration of its weather. He was on the 14th floor at 6:15 on a Tuesday in the second week of October when Patricia came out of the elevator. He had a new cart now. Karen Webb had arranged for a full equipment refresh when the role formalized, and it still felt slightly wrong in the way new things felt before you'd worn them in. He was replacing a floor sign near the south windows when he heard the elevator. She had coffee, 2 cups. She crossed to him and held one out. He looked at it. You made more coffee. I did. You told me Victor said you couldn't get the ratio right. I've been practicing, she said. Not quite defensive. Something closer to cautious optimism. He took it, tried it. She watched. It's better, he said. Better than what? Better than wrong. She looked at him, then looked away. Then a small sound that was, he was fairly certain, genuine laughter suppressed into something smaller,
Yes.
which was its own kind of thing.
Uh,
He drank the coffee and she stood near the window and they watched the city for a few minutes. Do you have to wait? They watch things that have been there all along and that you've started to see differently because of what happened in the space between then and now. Hill's attorney reached out to Park yesterday, she said. Settlement? Opening to discussion? That's different from a settlement. Yes, it's an opening. She held a cup with both hands. Park says we should take the meeting. I said we'd take the meeting when we were ready. We're not ready. When will you be? She thought about it. When the audit of the last 4 years of board communications is complete. When I know everything there is to know about how far back this goes and who knew what. I'd be to get to talk to Hill's attorney about what it's worth to close this without going to trial. And Richardson? Richardson is done, she said, simply. Whatever else happens, he's done. The board replaced him last month. The new member starts in January. Who'd you pick? A woman named Sandra Okafor. She ran municipal infrastructure for the city of Atlanta for 9 years. She knows how buildings actually work. Patricia glanced at him, seemed relevant. Darnell drank his coffee. It is. The city below was beginning to wake up. The first cars moving on Peachtree. The lights in the buildings across the street starting to come on, one by one, each one someone's beginning of a day. Each one a person arriving at place and starting the work of whatever their work was. Can I ask you something? Patricia said. Yes. Do you think about Vivian often? He was quiet for a moment. The question had landed differently than questions usually did. Not because it was painful, because it was careful. The care of someone who understood that grief was not a topic you entered without permission, and was asking anyway because the permission had been given somewhere along the way. Every day, he said, different amounts, but every day it's changed with the time. It changes shape, he said. It doesn't change in size, it just becomes less sharp, more like weather than like a wound. You feel it coming before it arrives. You know how to dress for it. Patricia looked at the window. Victor would have liked that. The metaphor. The honesty of it, she said. He had no patience for people who performed their way through hard things. He always said you could tell everything about a person's by how they handled the things they hadn't planned for. What did he say about you? She turned. What when things happened that you hadn't planned for? What did he say about how you handled them? She was quiet, not refusing to answer, thinking. He said I was the bravest person he'd ever met and also the person most likely to refuse help while being brave. A pause. He said it affectionately, but he also meant it as a problem to be solved. Did he solve it? No, she said. He just kept offering. He thought repetition was how you got through walls. Darnell thought about that. About the specific wisdom of a man who had looked at the most capable person in his life and had not tried to diminish her capability, but had also not stopped offering the thing she kept declining. That was a rare quality. The patience to keep making the offer, without making the offer feel like an indictment. He was right about that too, Darnell said. Most things, Patricia agreed. It was somewhat irritating. He almost laughed. Is, she corrected. Still which is, as she stopped. Which is the strange thing about people who were right about things. They stay right, even after. They stood with that for a moment. Two people who had lost the person they'd built their daily life around and had found in the building and in the work and in the unexpected thread that ran from a dead man's handwritten list to a Tuesday morning on the 14th floor. They had found something to stand together, not replacing anything, not trying to, just a different kind of not alone. The new title, Darnell said. Director of Operational Integrity. People on the lower floors keep asking me about it. What do you tell them? I tell them it means I walk around and pay attention. That's accurate. They think I'm joking. Are you? No, he said. But it's funny anyway. She looked at him with the expression he had started to recognize as hers specifically. The one that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't not a smile either. The expression of a person who had decided to let something be pleasant without having to announce that it was. Drink your coffee, she said. He drank his coffee. In November, the board voted to formalize the Director of Operational Integrity position permanently. Karen Webb sent Darnell the resolution by email with the subject line, shinily. He read it on his phone in the parking lot before his shift and then put the phone in his pocket and sat in the car for 2 minutes. His 2 minutes, the ones he took every morning. He thought about the particular chain of it. 12 years of early mornings and invisible work, and the accumulated observation of a building full of people who had never looked back. And before that, another 19 years in other buildings, doing other versions of the same work. And at the center of all of it, consistent and unremarkable and entirely foundational, the decision to do the work well, not because someone was watching, because it was the work and it deserved to be done well. He thought about what Vivian would have said. He thought she would have used the word finally, same as Karen Webb, and she would have meant something larger by it than Karen did. Not finally the title or finally the recognition, finally the world arranging itself in a way that accounted for what was actually true about who he was. He got out of the car, badged in at the side entrance. Derek gave him the nod. "Read the news this morning," Derek said. Darnell paused. "What news?" Derek pointed to his computer screen. A business item from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Hill's company listed as the defendant in a federal civil complaint. Whitmore Capital named as a co-defendant. The complaint cited fraudulent misrepresentation and violation of securities regulations in connection with a pattern of acquisition attempts, plural, in the commercial real estate sector. Not just Caldwell, others, a pattern. Darnell read the headline twice. "Mrs. Johnson did that?" Derek asked. "Park did it," Darnell said. "She gave him the room to." Derek nodded slowly. "Difference between those two things?" "Yes," Darnell said. "It is." He went to the elevator, went to 8, started his floors. At 9:30 his phone buzzed. "Patricia, you saw the AJC item." "Just now. Park filed yesterday. I would have told you sooner, but I wanted to see how it landed before." A pause. "Before talking about it." "It landed fine," Darnell said. "Better than fine. There are 2 other companies listed in the complaint. Both were approached by Hill in the last 3 years. Neither caught what he was doing." He stood with that, with the weight of what that meant. 2 other companies, 2 other rooms where a concealed document had not been seen, or had been seen and not spoken about, or where there had been no one sitting at the angle that let you catch the edge of something hidden. "It could have been 3, Darnell said. "Yes," she said quietly. "It could have been." He thought about the morning on the 14th floor when he'd stood in the hallway with a cold mop and a woman he'd never directly spoken to had said his name. He thought about the 2 minutes of lying in the dark that he'd taken that morning, same as every morning, and the fact that he'd spent them thinking about nothing in particular. Just the ceiling. Just the ordinary dark of an ordinary night before an ordinary day that had turned out to be something else entirely. "Thank you," Patricia said. "You already said that," Darnell said. "That first day, I know. I'll probably say it again." "You don't have to. I know that too," she said. "That's not why I'm saying it." He finished his floors. He went to 12 and 13 and came back to 14 to finish the section he'd left when the day had taken a different shape than planned. The 14th floor in the morning was the same as it had always been. The open plan, the light coming in wide and flat, the city visible all the way down the row of workstations and out through the glass. He stood at the south windows for a moment. Just a moment. Long enough to see Atlanta being Atlanta in the way he'd watched it for 12 years. Indifferent and busy and completely without awareness of any of the specific things happening inside the building. He thought about what it meant to be seen. Not famous, not celebrated, not held up as an example, just seen by the right person at the right moment. The specific experience of having someone look at you and perceive what was actually there, without the filter of your job title or your clothes or the cart you were pushing. The experience of being known correctly by someone who had bothered to look. Victor had looked and had written it down and carried it forward through death. Patricia had received it and acted on it, and Darnell had spent 12 years being the kind of person that made both of those things possible. Not performing it, not deciding to be trustworthy in the moments when trustworthiness was being evaluated, just being it. Consistently. In the ordinary work of ordinary days, when no one was watching, and there was no particular reason to do the work well, except that it was the work and it deserved to be done well. That was the whole of it. That was, he thought, the whole of most things that turned out to matter. You did the work, you paid attention, you told the truth when it cost you something to tell it, and sometimes, not always, not as a reward or a guarantee, but sometimes, the world arranged itself to account for that, and you ended up somewhere you hadn't imagined, and hadn't sought and could not have gotten to any faster than you did. He went back to his cart, checked the supply levels, made a note about the paper towels dispenser on the east end that was starting to stick, put in the maintenance request on his phone the way he always put in maintenance requests, specific, clear, with the exact location and the nature of the problem. He did this because the building needed it, because someone had to notice the things that were starting to go wrong before they went fully wrong, because that was, in the end, what he was for. 6 months after the board meeting, Darnell arrived at 4:45 on a Wednesday morning in early March and found a tatch of coffee on top of his cart in the utility closet on 8. Not his coffee. His was still in the travel mug in his hand. This was a Caldwell mug, the nice ones from the executive kitchen on 20, cream-colored with the company name in navy, and it was still hot, which meant it had been placed there recently. There was a folded note under it. He set down his own mug and picked it up and read it. The handwriting was precise. He recognized it. He'd seen it once before, on a list in a photograph Karen Webb had shown him when the role was being formalized. A personal document recovered from a safe. The same hand. Except this was Patricia's handwriting, not Victor's. They were similar, 31 years of a shared life doing that to the way people formed letters, but not identical. He could tell the difference. The note said, "Getting the ratio right. Tell me if I'm there yet. P." He looked at the coffee, looked at the note, looked at the coffee again. He drank it, standing in the utility room under the fluorescent light with his cart beside him and the building quiet in the way it was only at this hour. The way it had always been quiet at this hour, before anyone else arrived, before the urgency and the importance and the transit between one thing and the next filled every corner. It was good coffee, better than before. Still not quite right. She was overcorrecting on the water temperature, he could tell, doing too much to fix the problem she'd identified, but closer, meaningfully closer. He folded the note and put it in his shirt pocket. Then he started his floors. He did 8 and 9 and 10 and 11. Methodical. Thorough, with the care he had always brought to it. He reached the south windows on 14 at 6:40 and stopped there the way he sometimes stopped just for a minute and watched the city come up from the dark into the morning. Atlanta below, the lights coming on, the shape of it emerging, not dramatic, just steady. The ordinary daily emergence of a place that had no knowledge of the specific lives happening inside its buildings and yet somehow held them all. The unasked-for ground on which everything was built. He thought about Vector, about a man who had moved through rooms with real attention and had noticed a custodian and had considered him worth knowing and had written his name down in a list of trusted people and had given that list to his wife to find after he was gone. He thought about the chain of it, the length of it, how long a thing could travel if it was made of something real. He thought about Vivian, about the two minutes every morning and the coffee, Ablama, the parking lot, and the way some people became part of the shape of the days so permanently that their absence changed the geometry of every room you were ever in again. And you learned to live in the new geometry. And sometimes the new geometry had things in it you hadn't expected, and you let them be what they were. He thought about the coffee in his hand, overcorrected, closer. He thought about the note in his pocket, and then he picked up his cart and went back to work. Because the building needed what it needed, and he was the one who had always known how to give it. And the floors, as they always had, were waiting. The civil complaint made news beyond Atlanta in the second week of November. Not front-page national news, but the business press picked it up. The commercial real estate trade publications, 3 regional outlets. A brief mention in a financial wire service that got picked up by aggregators and spread in the low-key, persistent way that business news and spread did it. Not with drama, but with the slow accumulation of attention from people for whom it was relevant and who passed it to others for whom it was relevant, until the circle of people who knew about Hill and Scott Hill and Whitmore Capital and the pattern of acquisition attempts was significantly larger than it had been the week before. Darnell read about it in pieces, not because he was tracking it obsessively, just because it surfaced when it surfaced. In the break room on 7 where someone had left the paper to the business section, or in the email updates Karen Webb forwarded when something relevant to the case appeared in the press, or in the brief mentions Park made in the bi-weekly status calls that Darnell had been included on since October. What he understood from all of it, assembled over weeks, was this. Hill had not invented his approach. He had inherited it, refined it, applied it with more precision than whoever had taught it to him. The pattern went back further than 18 months. Further, possibly, than anyone had initially thought. And the federal complaint was not the end of the process. It was the beginning of a longer one. One that would take years and would resolve itself imperfectly, the way most things resolved. Not with a clean verdict, but with a negotiated conclusion that satisfied no one completely and left some things unanswerable. This was the nature of accountability in Darnell Sunig's experience. It rarely gave you the whole shape. It gave you enough to know that it happened and enough to make it harder to happen again. And that had to be sufficient. Because waiting for the whole shape meant waiting forever, and forever was not something anyone had on offer. He said as much to Patricia one morning in late November, standing at the windows on 20 with the city below, then go about its business in the new cold air of an Atlanta November. It won't be clean, he said. Even if it goes well, I know, Hill will walk away with something. Whitmore will reorganize. Richardson's name will stay clean enough to matter. I know all of that, she said, not impatient, just already there. I made my peace with it in September. What are you holding on to then? He asked. Not a challenge, a real question. She looked at the window. The fact that we found it. The fact that the next time someone tries this, and someone will, they'll find a company with different protocols and a different awareness of its own vulnerabilities. She paused. And the fact that the people who depend on this company to be what it says it is, employees, vendors, the communities where our properties sit, they didn't lose something they didn't know was at risk. He thought about that. About the people in the building who didn't know their livelihoods had been 3 feet from a different outcome. The people in the break rooms and the offices and the lower floors who had come to work every day through the whole of this without knowing that something fundamental had been threatened and had been stopped. Victor built something worth protecting, Darnell said. He did, she said, and now we're protecting it. We, just that word, in that sentence. He noticed it. He didn't draw attention to it. He just noticed it and let it be what it was. December came. The building got decorated. The lobby had a large arrangement of white lights that Darnell thought was distasteful. He had been consulted, which had surprised him. Karen Webb had sent an email to a distribution list that now included him and asked for input on the lobby's holiday presentation, and he had replied with 3 words, "Keep it simple." And they had. Which meant either that they had already planned to and he'd just confirmed it, or that someone had actually read his email and treated it as input. Either way, simple, clean. Right, he was on the committee now, not the decorating committee, a different one. The Operations Advisory Committee that Patricia had formed in October, which met monthly and included Karen Webb and the head of facilities and 2 floor managers and Darnell, and which served the purpose of moving information between the ground level and the executive level in both directions.
Let's go.
It was a formal version of what Darnell had always done, informally, which meant it was more visible. Which meant other people were now doing versions of what he did, looking at the ground-level truth of the building and bringing it up. That felt like the right thing, better than having one person do it invisibly. More durable. He said so to Patricia at the December committee meeting, which she attended in person, which she didn't have to do. It's working, he said. The committee. People are talking. They always talked, she said. Now someone is listening. That's the difference. Yes, she said. It usually is. The year January, cold for Atlanta, not brutal, just honest. Darnell's car had a heater that worked inconsistently. He wore an extra layer on the mornings when it didn't. He had been wearing extra layers on inconsistent heater mornings for 3 years and hadn't fixed the car because the car ran fine otherwise and because some things you just lived with. He was thinking about fixing it. Not because anything had changed about the car. Because something had shifted in the way he thought about small inconveniences. Not dramatically. Just, he had started to think of himself as someone for whom the small things were worth attending to. The stuck heater, the passenger mirror with the electrical tape. Not urgent, but worth doing. Worth leaving things in good working order, not just for other people, but for himself. Vivian had always said that. He'd taken care of everything around him. Now take care of yourself too, Darnell. He'd been better at it when she was alive and had someone to be better for. Then she'd gone and he'd stopped seeing the point. He was starting to see it again. Not because of Patricia. Not romantically. That was not what was happening here, and he was clear about that in himself without it needing to be a story. What was happening was something more structural. He had been handed, through a series of events he hadn't sought, a reason to take his own presence in the world seriously. A recognition that his particular way of seeing and being seen had consequence. That he was not and had never been a person happening in a corner somewhere with no effect on the larger shape of things. That was worth fixing the heater for. He took the car in on a Saturday in mid-January, $212. He paid it without the particular pinch he'd have felt a year ago, because his compensation changed along with his title. And the change was enough to make $212 a minor errand, rather than a decision. He drove home in a warm car. It was a small thing, he let it be exactly as good as it was. No bigger, no smaller. On the last Friday in January, Patricia knocked on the door of the small office on the 14th floor that had been assigned to his role. It was a real office. Not large, not particularly impressive, but a room with a door and a window and a desk and a chair for anyone who came to talk to him, which people had started to do. People from the lower floors who had observations or concerns, or just things they'd noticed and hadn't known where to take before. He had not advertised this. He had just been present, and presence, in his experience, was the thing that invited people. She knocked and came in, which meant she was treating it as his space, which it was. "He'll settled," she said. He looked up. "When, this morning, Park called me an hour ago. Terms, significant financial penalty, permanent exclusion from any acquisition activity involving Caldwell Properties or affiliates. Cooperation with the ongoing investigation into Whitmore's broader activities." She paused. "Reed cooperated fully 3 months ago. She's working with the federal investigators." Darnell sat back in his chair. The chair was not as good as the ones in the boardrooms. He'd noticed it and not mentioned it and didn't plan to. It was fine. Whitmore, still moving, but slower. And watched. She looked at the window. "It's not everything, but it's enough to say that it didn't work." "It didn't work," he agreed. "Because you spoke up," she said. "Because you put me in the room," he said. "And before that, because Victor wrote a list. And before that, because he stopped at a supply cart 12 years ago and asked about marble." He looked at her. "It's a long chain." "It is. Pull one link out and it doesn't hold." She was quiet for a moment. "Which link would you pull?" she asked. He thought about it honestly. "Victor stopping," he said. "That's the first one. Everything else comes from that." He wouldn't say that. No. He'd say it was the marble. Darnell paused. He'd say if the marble hadn't needed restoring, he'd never have stopped to ask, and then none of it follows. Patricia looked at him for a moment, and then made the sound he'd started to recognize. The suppressed thing that was close to a laugh. "That's very like him." "Yeah," Darnell said. "It is." She moved toward the door, then paused, turned back. "He would have liked this," she said, seeing how it came out. "He'd have had notes," Darnell said. "Absolutely," she said. "He always had notes." She left. The door stayed open the way he kept it. He looked at the window. At the city. At whatever the city looked like on a cold Friday morning in January, from the fourth floor of a building that was older than it looked and cleaner than people noticed, and full of the ordinary complicated bodies of people who've moved through it, without knowing most of what moved through it with them. He thought about Victor Bryant, who had looked at the world around him carefully and had formed his views of people, not from what they wore or where they sat, but from how they did what they did. Who had understood that the person with the least visible power in a room was sometimes the one with the most accurate read of it. Who had written that understanding down in a small document and put it in a safe and given it to the one person he trusted to use it well. He thought about Vivian, who had loved him completely and correctly and who would found this entire year either very funny or deeply satisfying, and probably both in the way she experienced most things, simultaneously, without resolving the contradiction, because she'd always known that the contradictions were where the truth lived. He thought about this building, the marble in the lobby that had been restored after one question worsened, the right ear, the 14th floor with its morning light, the utility closet on 8 where his cart still lived, The southwest and what the city looked like from them at 6 Weenift when most people were still asleep and the day hadn't yet decided what it was going to be. He thought about 4:45 in the morning. The moment before the alarm that wasn't an alarm. The 2 minutes in the dark that were his. The coffee, black, no sugar. The drive through a city telling the truth. He thought about the note in his shirt pocket from a cold morning in March. Getting the ratio right. Tell me if I'm there yet. He would tell her. He would tell her honestly, because that was what he did. That was the whole of what he'd ever done. He showed up. He paid attention. He told the truth about what he saw. And it turned out that was enough. Not for everything. Not as a guarantee of anything, but enough to matter. Enough to leave something better than he found it. Enough to justify the alarm that wasn't an alarm and the drive through the dark and the first floor of the morning and all the floors after it. More than enough. He picked up his coffee, finished it, set the cup down precisely in the center of his desk blotter. Then he stood up and went back to work.